Second nature. Abstraction is always an abstraction of nature, a process that creates nature's double. A second nature, a space of human existence in which collective life dwells among its own products and comes to take the environment it produces to be natural. Mackenzie Wark, A Hacker Manifesto. In the mid-1990s, Tara Donovan was experimenting in her studio when serendipity struck. She knocked over a big box of toothpicks, picked it up, and then noticed that the spilled contents had latticed into a shape that echoed the perfect corner of their container. Her instincts kicked in, and she was inspired to test the limits of this mini phenomenon. Box by box, she bought 500,000 toothpicks, and by 1996 had assembled them into a freestanding cube well over waist high. Held together by nothing more than friction and gravity, the squared-off structure of splintered bits was a paradox in 3 dimensions: loose yet contained, fragile yet stable, fractured yet whole. Its simple cohesion seemed to evidence something fantastic. Distinctions broke down between a mere thing and sheer stuff as quantity became entity and the inordinate became ordinate. Yet this hard-edged abstract form bound a chaotic composition, an unpredictable nest defined by the material's innate properties. Converting contradiction to coherence, Donovan harnessed a physical dynamic that released a surprising energy. While the cornered toothpick discovery was accidental, it was no mistake that Donovan recognized its potential. As Donovan later noted, a lot of art making comes from just paying attention to accidental discoveries. Attentive to texture, volume, and the inherent physical traits of a single, often useful product, toothpick, straight pin, drinking straw, button, paper plate, adhesive tape, plastic cup, mylar sheet, she determines how it might cohere in multitudes that exude unexpected qualities. Such products are stacked, twisted, looped, or clustered with an almost viral repetition, so that they assume forms that both evoke natural systems and seem to defy the laws of nature. Her abstractions mimic growth through a process that creates nature's double. Presented in expansive scale, her works transform quantity into the quantifiable, into the unquantifiable, static into dynamic, prosaic into sublime. And in doing so, Donovan brings the pragmatic rigor of American art in the 1960s to our own era of digital, cellular, and emergent networks. Subjecting traditionally non-art materials to her eccentric yet highly systematic arrangements, Donovan updates the language of minimalism's specific objects and conceptualism's dematerialized processes with a new syntax. Her practice incorporates their literal, non-gestural, non-compositional methods insofar as she relinquishes compositional control to follow a material's given properties. Based on what it can do, she ascertains a single rule to apply a single process to a single material, and does so countless times. This obsessive concision and repetition builds in rhythms that are not ordered or predictable but are non-linear, irregular, and evocative of emergent expansion in which repetition implies replication, rules are self-generating codes, and material properties shift, and even reverse, when increased by orders of magnitude. Unlike reductive geometries, Donovan's works reflect on organic expansion from the simple to the complex, as when cells fertilize or a village grows into a city. Taking shape not through a controlling logic but through the internal DNA of each part and factors of environment, her works mirror nature's own growth. These sizable matrices of innumerable units prioritize open coherence over solid form. Recalling topographies at geologic, biologic, atomic, and even nanoscales, Donovan's works manifest the manifold possibilities of abstracted nature. Because their quantities and structure suggest no inherent limit, Donovan's works pressure the boundaries of the perceptible, introducing a fresh uncertainty to the notion of what a sculptural object might be. I assemble units that I reproduce and collect in various ways to discover how they will behave visually in a population. Tara Donovan, 2003. For Donovan, a successful piece transcends its material. It triggers a visceral reaction not only to the elements of its construction, but to the illusions their collective volume creates. For example, her installation Nebulous appears almost like a mist concentrated over about 20 feet of floor, its uneven shape suggesting either a blown-up view of microscopic mould or a scaled-down model of the Milky Way. Viewers might never fathom what it is, even if told. Its title aptly characterizes the uncertain perceptual experience she creates with nothing other than invisible and magic Scotch tape. She loops thousands of subtly frosted strips into units that spiral and mound in an irregular, airy weave. Once the mystery is revealed, the elusive imagery still holds. Donovan notes the work's transcendent qualities in both its remarkable gestalt and its uncanny appearance. It's like fog. It becomes so soft, it looks like it grew out of the floor. An encounter with Donovan's art is distinctly pleasurable. Distant views are sensually evocative. Closer inspection rewards curiosity. With lure, we are drawn in by what looks like a dense scattering of giant spider eggs or enormous dandelion puffs waiting to spore, only to find that the silky clumps are pom-poms of innumerable cut strands of fishing line. In Colony, the floor is populated by a hilly lattice that approximates an aerial view of a distant European city or close-up of a honeycomb. In fact, it is structured of thousands of cut-off pencils clustered upright, edge to edge. Bluffs fools viewers with nearly 5-foot-high forms that echo the skyline of craggy Far East mountain peaks or the stratified build-up of underground stalagmites, but are actually a multitude of clear plastic buttons in teetering stacks. And what resembles a 5-foot-long reef of striated coral sponges or globular crystalline growths is untitled paper plates, intricately layered bunches of the bleached paper products. As the viewer approaches each work, the experience of perspectival shift and sudden realization sparks chains of wonder, discovery, tension, and awe. What is it? It's that. I can't believe it. She did it how? Who knew lots of that could become this? Mine is a mechanized process without the luxury of a machine. I like the idea that my work is, in a primitive sense, manufactured. It illustrates a kind of reversal of the intended fate of the material. Instead of this mass-produced item being widely and individually distributed, it is amassed and remanufactured. Tara Donovan, 2003. Donovan has honed her sensitivity to how individual items can confound and astound when configured en masse. Her pursuit is simply focused by the belief that there is one answer for each material. She explains, I may find that a material has a particular quality in which I see some potential, but the possibility of it becoming a piece can occur or literally take years. Or Donovan engages one-on-one with the product in what she calls an open experimental approach. Once she has cracked the material's natural code for coherence, the rule of manufacture is set. Layer or stick or loop or stack. Following the rule, products are assembled with hive-like efficiency by many hands over many days or months. The procedure implements the method famously described by Sol LeWitt. When an artist uses a conceptual form of art, it means that all of the planning and decisions are made beforehand and the execution is a perfunctory affair. The idea becomes the machine that makes the art. Donovan's manual assembly line version of a mechanized process is an intimately direct means towards a more expansive engagement with issues of scale that she acknowledges are unattainable when working individually. When Donovan's repetitions are multiplied by as many hands, she achieves works not simply of greater size, but of greater relative refinement between part and whole, in orders of magnitude beyond the normal scope of the man-made. What comes to mind are zoomed views of complex natural systems that shift from the galactic to the cellular or atomic. Much like the sequences in Ray and Charles Eames' 1977 film Powers of Ten. It is only through such manifold repetition that Donovan's abstractions reveal their second nature. The effect of her machinations has been likened to what Baudelaire called the sacred machinery. As repetition turns metaphysical, obsession and process become transcendental and magic happens. But the entire process stems from Donovan's attention to and intuition for how a familiar product might be used as a unique raw material with unexpected results. Certainly, the hexagonal shape of pencils defined the pattern of colony, but cut in cross-section, their graphite centers hint at the dark nuclear contents of gestating cells or energy plants. Likewise, the round shape of the pliant paper plates triggered that sculpture's round volumes, but their scallop-shaped rims animate light's absorption from the curvy edge to the shadowy center of each unit. The flat discs of buttons enabled the stacking of bluffs, but it is the holes visible in each that catch light like a string of bubbles rising through the molten shape. And Scotch tape's sticky surface and transparency dictated the results in nebulous. The fishing line's translucence, designed for underwater invisibility, lent lure its fine sheen. Yet Donovan notices qualities more subtle and fleeting. If you pick up a piece of Scotch tape, it reads as clear, but if you put that piece of tape in sunlight, it has a purplish hue, as does fishing line. So light affects the pieces. I am attracted to the fugitive colour that exists in transparent materials. It's not a real colour, it comes and goes. More than just the external form, it is an essential quality within each material that lends Donovan's works their visually evocative, dynamic, and even mutable aspects. Donovan's attention to a material's specificity and the distinct sensations it elicits calls to mind the work of Carl Andre. Like Andre, Donovan assembles uniformly manufactured materials in structures derived from the object's form to reveal its internal qualities. Andre's permutations of simple structures, square, row, grid, allow his material's most essential qualities to be seen. A floor work of square copper plates shows their flat, even-sided, fire-bright copperness. One of the fire bricks reveals their chalky white, stackable brickness. In contrast, Donovan's nebulous does not focus on the sensation of tapeness as such, but uses it to expand on manifold allusions to substances, perhaps bacterial or galactic, quite unlike tape. Rather than rely on our common associations with tape or pencils, buttons or paper plates in domestic, office or school activities, Donovan's elusive imagery emerges in spite of its everyday components. Their mass-produced and therefore identical forms enable Donovan's process of cellular aggregation of like parts. She thus infuses Andre's rationally ordered and finite structures with a more fluid, non-geometric sprawl. Donovan's cumulative process connotes an ongoing growth and dispersion beyond the confines of any fixed frame. Even when presented in squared-off formats, her works read as cross-sections of an ever more irregular and expansive texture or topography. For example, with right-angle edges outlining 2 to 4 foot high undulating black layers of ribbed tar paper, her installation Transplanted presents indoors what appears to be a freeze frame of glacial-formed rock or dark rolling waves. Donovan employs the grid in untitled plastic cups, an arrangement of more than 3 million 7-ounce cups stacked at various heights in straight rows across more than 40 feet. Some especially tall columns lean from their fixed coordinates, sighing under their own weight and collectively relaxing the rigid structure. Those cups nested at the work's edge remain as recognizable as a sleeve at the convenience store, but the overall mass of softly translucent vessels absorbs light and shadow in ways that blur the rows of hollow plastic into what has been described as an undulating, otherworldly river valley, an ethereal cloudscape, a pixelated city, a celestial honeycomb, or an iridescent ice field. The boundlessness in such references attests to Donovan's ability to employ the grid as an expansive vehicle rather than as a restrictive container. Compared to Andre's bricks, which invite an inward focus on variations within an artificial scheme, Donovan's cups infer a natural continuity of form outward. Her grid resists a centripetal insistence on literal materialist fact and instead hints at an ongoing centrifugal dispersal of matter into perceptual flicker. Donovan herself has said of untitled plastic cups, "Certainly the idea of medium specificity is inherent in my work, but also the idea of abstraction and the sublime. It is often said that modernist painting is an infinite plane defined only by its framing. This is the same way I feel about my own work within the parameters of architectural space." The iterative extremes of Donovan's process echo the ways Eva Hesse borrowed the materials, forms, and repetition of minimalism as a container for her own obsessiveness. From a distance, Hesse's fiberglass box Ascension 3, 1968, reads as a typical minimalist cube, but it is animated by an interior bristling with nearly 30,000 clear vinyl tubes, woven through drilled holes in the frame, that coat it like a cilia of an internal organ or the pelt of a polar bear. In juxtaposing an unyielding industrial frame with the chaotic pliable mass hand-threaded inside, Hesse explained, "I would try to find the most absurd opposites or extreme opposites, and I was always aware of their contradictions formally. It was always more interesting than making something right-sized, right-proportioned." Combining her attention to the way materials worked with what she called obsessive repetition, Hesse modelled the raw beginnings of the process that Donovan has since evolved. Like Hesse, Donovan builds an energetic tension in her works through contradictions that, instead of pairing as finite opposites, she coheres as a single, continuous and contingent structure. Just as Hesse made variations on the ascension theme, Donovan has explored the implications of the discovery that led to untitled toothpicks. Using nickel-plated steel straight pins in untitled pins, Donovan updated the same technique of sprinkling full a four-sided frame that is then removed, a moulding process she likens to building a sandcastle. Compared with the raw, dry tangle of a wood cube, the pins interlace more closely, resulting in a seductive intensity of density and tension alike. The shimmering mesh of hair-thin metal in fact amplifies not only the appearance of cohesion, but also the inference of instability. Each tiny sliver of the solid form seems to glint on the verge of disappearance. How many of us have had such a pin slip through our fingers, never to be found? In 2004, Donovan applied her filled cube method to tempered glass, this time stacking over 200 square sheets of the material within a frame and hammering alternate corners until each plate shattered into thousands of crystalline pieces. The resulting pattern of cracks tracks the diffusion of energy from the succession of blows, a visual suspension of a repetitive violence within an uncannily still silence. Again, the transparent bits do not crumble under their own weight, but remain pressured into a freestanding icy cube whose infinitesimal fissures refract light into a snow-white opacity. Like the others, untitled glass holds its form with a material whose familiar behaviour seems to reverse itself when assembled in such quantity. Sharing a fraternal, not identical relation, Donovan's cubes illustrate each material's elemental uniqueness that in turn defines each work's seemingly mysterious internal dynamics and external appearance. If relying on the fundamental to reveal the exceptional has become a Donovan hallmark, her ability to achieve the unexpected through the iconic art historical form of the cube invites one other comparison: Richard Serra's one-ton prop, House of Cards, 1969. A cube of 4-foot square lead plates bound solely by their own weight of contact evidences his interest in making transparent those forces that allow objects to shape space as sculptural material. Remarkably, Serra also developed his practice by exploiting a serendipitous corner discovery. Placing an upright lead plate in a corner just to get it out of the way, he noticed that it wedged between the walls and, unable to fall to the left or right, free stood on its end. Voila! Scaled up in steel as strike to Roberta and Rudy, 1969-71, the plate improbably balanced on its edge to divide and redefine the area around it from inert emptiness to a seemingly charged, weight-bearing space. Donovan's pixelated cubes and Serra's propped planes both create counterintuitive physical effects through the most intuitive forces: friction, gravity, and inertia. This produces sculpture not as object, but as actions to relate to oneself, material, place, and process. Yet while Serra activates space with the sheer tonnage of impenetrable metal sheets, Donovan combines loose bits into a dynamic matrix permeated by spaces the size of slivers and fissures. It is these countless volumes of unfixed air between parts, the spaces through which light and material can slip, that structure Donovan's works. Instead of falling over, hers have a limitless potential to fall apart. Her pieces both divide and multiply Serra's concentration on balanced weight exponentially, and, in this splitting, introduce a surprising new energy of density and lightness. What appeared to be a question of object, non-object, has turned out to be a question of seeing and not seeing. Now we are presented and challenged with the infinite, everyday richness of phenomenal perception, one which seeks to discover and value the potential for experiencing beauty in everything. Robert Irwin, 1985. Donovan's balance of density and lightness activates infinite, everyday richness in her installation Haze, a particular mass resembling a fog bank formed of millions of translucent drinking straws buttressed between two corners of a room. Stacked at billowing depths, they rise over 13 feet in a lattice of circular openings into the intersections between each tiny plastic tube. The resulting field of clear and refracted views shuffles kaleidoscopically as we move across its atmospheric plane. This unfixed flicker of opacity and transparency triggers a hazy blur of perceptual uncertainty and awareness of our own motion. Donovan's work recalls the phenomenological explorations of light and space that Robert Irwin has pursued since the 1960s, its permeable structure of immeasurably more parts also evokes nature's morphological dynamism in eroding geological topographies, the boundaries of cells, and links between neural synapses. Donovan's abstractions thus present a distinct energy of surface as an osmotic energy. The oscillation between their layered parts and our sense of them collectively and individually draws our attention both inward and outward. The experience suggests a beyond, one sublime and the other prosaic, an ephemeral apparition and an actual straw pile. This tension in Donovan's in-between sculpture redirects our perception. Irwin's question of seeing and not seeing the object, non-object, becomes a complex back and forth between the part and the whole, because parts behave differently with light and space when experienced in sum. Donovan's recent use of light-reactive materials like mylar and polyester film enhances her work's capacity to more naturally mirror light's reflection, refraction, absorption, and diffusion. When her installations are deliberately integrated with their architectural setting, they further engage the environment as integral to the sensual experience. In a dynamic relationship to space, Donovan terms sight-responsive. These particular works fuse objects, light, and architecture with an updated phenomenal coherence, forming shimmering constellations of what appear to be tiny bubbles. Untitled mylar tape pins thousands of half-inch wide loops of silver mylar tape on a wall carefully lit to bounce shadows and reflections within each. The cluster's condensation looks like naturally beading liquid. Her latest untitled work cuts through a wall with a rectangular aperture, an open window, full to the brim and flush to the edges with thousands of loosely folded sheets of clear polyester film. The thin plastic flops in layers that become progressively more compressed under their own weight. The loose curls at the top flow into a bottom section of tightly compacted strata. Here, the in-betweenness of Donovan's work is at its most literal. On one side of the piece is diffused natural light, on the other artificially illuminated interior, and depending on the viewer's position, the cross-section of horizontal folds may resemble transparent water currents at varying depths and speeds of epidermal cells that interlace as skin tissue. In either case, Donovan evokes a natural flow and growth far more expansive than the confines of the wall, which itself becomes spatially implicated as a slice of a larger whole. From toothpick cubes to mylar constellations, Donovan's abstractions allow us to experience unexpectedly contradictory and counterintuitive properties by mirroring nature's simple replication into complex organization. The awe this inspires also reminds us of our inability to grasp the unseen systems, our brain's neural workings, society's swarm tendencies, the climate's chaotic shifts that shape our ever more fluid and incomprehensible world. Her artificial second nature allegorizes both the infinite possibility of as yet unseen worlds and the reality of our own perceptual limitations. As we struggle to understand the basic components of life itself, the nano, cellular, microbiological, societal, and cosmological, Donovan enables us to recognize the wonder of such contingent coherence. Her ingenuity and with fundamentally overlooked materials creates delicate interrelationships that seem to break down notions of the object while yielding surprisingly monumental results. Simultaneously engaging the eye, body, and mind, Donovan's second nature offers us a glimpse of an alternate yet actual reality of openness, transparency, and balance.